Yeah, we are live. Hi everyone, I'm Deyasini Roy, and I welcome you all to Stories of Women's Identity and Social Control, the TMYS Reviews December 2021 project in association with Oxford University Press. We are calling for submissions of stories, essays, and poems as part of the project. To know more, please visit www.tellmeyourstory.biz. And today we are honored to present Professor Nasmeem Akhtar, Professor Priyanka Tripathi, and Professor Harlee Singh. I now look forward to introducing our panelists. Professor Nasmeem is the head Department of English and chairperson, Center for Women's Studies, Dibrugarh University. She's been teaching literature to postgraduate students and have been supervising MPhil and PhD dissertations for more than a decade now. She's especially interested in feminist theory and women's studies. She's involved in major research projects on issues related to women's studies, gender sensitization programs. She's been a resource in various national and international conferences and workshops, both offline and online. We welcome you, ma'am,
Thank
and
you
a
very
very good
much,
afternoon.
Deyasini.
A very good
Good
evening to
evening.
you. Sorry.
Good evening. Thank you very much for that introduction. And I'm very much glad to be on this panel this evening.
A pleasure to have you, ma'am. Okay, we also have Dr. Priyanka Tripathi joining us today. She is an associate professor of English, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Institute of Technology, Patna. She's published extensively with Indian Literature, Journal of Graphic Novels and Comics, Post-Colonial Studies, Economic and Political Weekly, amongst others. She's currently working on an ICSSR funded project entitled Mapping Domestic Violence in the Times of COVID 19, a study from Bihar. Book reviews editor for Rupkatha Journal on interdisciplinary studies in humanities. She works in the area of gender studies, South Asian fiction, geohumanities, and graphic novels. We welcome you, ma'am, and a very good evening to you.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be part of this panel with Professor Harleen and Professor Nasmeem, and of course, moderated by you, Deyasini. Thank you.
Our pleasure, ma'am, our pleasure. Thank you so much. We also have Professor Harlee Singh joining us today. She is a professor of literature, gender, and sexuality studies at Prandis University. She is the director of the Women's Studies Research Center. She writes about the post colonial novel, Indian film and music, women's literature and history, the South Asian diaspora, and post colonial urban space. She is the author of The Rani of Jhansi, Gender, History, and People in India. So we welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you
A,
very much. Happy to be here.
yeah, a very good morning to you.
Thank you. Yeah, morning for me.
Yeah. Uh, so I would like to begin today's session by, you know, asking you your perspectives on the topics. But before that, I would like to say some historical narratives, most notably by Nicholas Turk, argue that caste was brought in by British colonialism in the 19th century. Some other views uphold that it was the setting up of the Muslim sultanates and empires in the medieval age that created the institution of caste. But genetic research shows that the core feature of caste goes back thousands of years and existed before even the British Raj or the Islam existed. Professor Nasmeem, could you please offer us your perspectives on the topic of today's session, that is intercaste marriages, historical perspectives?
How much time do I have, Deyasini?
You have 10 minutes.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Yes. First, as I had already said, I mean, this is a very, very pertinent topic to be brought onto the table to discuss, because this is a practice which we have all encountered at different times, either in our personal lives, or we might have just come across people, in these kind of marital relationships where people, two partners belong to two different castes. So having said that, I would like to suggest that if we go into the historical part of it, when we talk about in the historical perspective of intercaste marriages, it appears to me that this is not something which was not there in our in the ancient times, if I may call it ancient. So in the traditional Indian societies, it was the members of each caste and subcaste were to marry within their own endogamous group. And of course, I suppose there has been a logic behind it. The very fact that the societies at that time were, to a great extent, within a particular circle. So you have relatives, you have people belonging to one caste, residing in one area for, I mean, within a particular area. So that is why perhaps, primarily because of the ability, or rather the inability, to move about more frequently, uh, was one of the reasons as to why there was this emphasis on, having people of one similar single caste to be married together. So it was prime I feel that it was, apart from all the different other caste distinctions or the varna system that our history books talk about, I also feel the very, practical idea of the lack of mobility, maybe, or the lack of convenient mobility could be one of the reasons as to why there was an emphasis to marry within a single caste. But if we go into the scriptures, we also come across instances where there was an intercaste marriage. And if I may, I mean, this is of course something that all of us know. When we talk about intercaste marriages, we actually talk about, we assume that there is a caste system. And I mean, there would be men from higher varna marrying women from the lower varna, which we refer to as a hypogamous marriage. On the other hand, there might be another one wherein a man from the lower caste marries a woman from the upper caste. So in we have such kind of instances in Indian societies since time immemorial. For example, even when we go to the scriptures, we find that there are such instances in the Mahabharata. There are also, even prior to that, you have, I mean, even in pre-independence India, we also came across Brahmins marrying women from the lower caste in particular areas. Similarly, there is this very instance which you talk about even in your I mean, uh, in your pamphlet, wherein you said, where you talk about the Nambudri Brahmins marrying women, the Mayar women. So intercaste marriages were very much popular even during, I mean, amongst the Rajputs and the Marathas as well. So when we come across, I mean, so it appears to me that, apart from the historical evidences that we have, the very fact that, you need also, I mean, there is also another aspect attached to that. The very fact that, in India, marriages are, said to be just once in a lifetime kind of an affair. So it's not just, for the time being. So once you marry, you are there, or rather you vow to be with the person, with your partner, till maybe till death do you part. So
Right.
that is how it is. So that is why, it is a very, very conscientious decision to marry a person who is familiar with your own, with your community, with the practices, the food habits, the religious practices, etc. So when we look at all of it, I mean, we find that there is this tendency to marry within the same caste, so that there would be less problems in adjustments. So this was somehow the feeling earlier, but now, with the coming in of globalization, with the coming in of the urbanization, and also with the fact that we have now entered, I mean, into the 22nd century, 21st century, also is one of the causes because of which we have the social customs somewhere loosening up. But even beyond that, when we look into the statistics, it appears that it is almost about, I think, barely about 5% of Indian marriages are intercaste. And when we talk about intercaste marriages, we are mostly talking about the intercaste marriages amongst Hindus. So that is what, I mean, is often talked about, because in a Muslim society, there is not much protest, or there is not much questioning about marriage between two different castes, so to say. So when we look into all of it, uh, I would like to actually bring into the fore, or rather bring onto the table some points that have come to my mind. Say, for example, the first point I would like to say is that uh, intercaste marriages is not something which is a very modern or a very contemporaneous concept. It is something which was there, or rather, it was something which was recognized as long as I mean, as long as you find them in the mythological texts, etc., even in scriptures, etc. Even when you go into the legalities of it, we find that you have the Hindu Marriage Act in 1955, the other one in the Special Marriage Act earlier than that in 1954. And so when you talk about all of it, we see that there were enough ways to actually provide for an intercaste marriage. Despite that, when we think in terms of the kind, I mean, the proportion in which such marriages have taken place, as I have said, I found that it's barely about 5%. And that 5% also, we know, comes with a lot of other responsibilities, or maybe there'll be a lot of questionings on such marriages that take place. So it's not a cakewalk for those who actually go into an intercaste marriage. So you have lot many instances of honor killings. You have lot many instances of the family, I mean, the couple being abandoned, etc., leading a life of maybe they are completely excommunicated, etc. So when you look at all of it, I have a feeling, especially when I look at it from the as a student of women's studies, it appears to me that in cases where a woman has actually been able to assert her identity, assert her preferences, only in such cases have an intercaste marriage taken place. Otherwise, I mean, even if there is an intercaste marriage which has taken place, it becomes a very difficult question. And most often, sometimes we also, if though I say that in Muslims there is no such practice of, or rather there is no questioning of the intercaste marriage, but there are instances where even a Muslim girl who marries out of her own choice is somewhere not allowed to enter her family's house, her father's house. So it primarily becomes a question, first of all, of controlling your identity, controlling your independence somewhere. And also, apart from that, I have a feeling that there is a lot of what to say the policy pressure that comes in. For example, you have special privileges under the Dr. Ambedkar scheme for social integration through intercaste marriages. So when you think in those terms, I mean, I feel there is a kind of a paradox. I mean, on the one hand, you agree that intercaste marriage can be an antidote to all caste divisions and distinctions. At the same time, I feel there is still a kind of, I mean, there is still a large section of society which is not at all, not somehow fully prepared to welcome an intercaste marriage. So I think in the course of our discussion, we may come into the causes and also maybe how we address these issues. But at the moment, I would like to say, basically, the kind of a paradoxical situation, while we all are heading towards a liberal society, despite the fact that we all have actually explored our religious scriptures, and we feel that there is, I mean, there is a lot of space for intercaste marriages, yet somewhere it is still considered, if not a taboo, a questionable kind of a practice. So that is where I think I would like to leave the floor open for discussion with the other, panelists. Thank you.
Ma'am, I absolutely agree with you. Thank you so much for that enlightening answer. I'll come back to you when we talk about the regressive cultural orthodoxies of the caste hierarchy. Moving on, Priyanka, ma'am, if you could share with us your perspectives on the topic.
So I think maybe I can just add to what Professor Nasmeen said. Uh, I think the very idea of intercaste marriage uh, is contingent upon decoding the dimension of marriage and caste in the context of India. So when we talk about marriage, a commonly accepted kind of definition is that it's a formal union, a social and legal contract between two individuals that kind of unites their life legally, economically, emotionally, and to a certain extent also, or to maybe to a larger extent also sexually. Now, this institution gets acknowledged by the state and religious authorities. So primarily, marriage purpose was to bind women to men. Like historically, when we are talking about why did marriage at all came into being, because that guaranteed that a man's children were truly biologically his heirs. So through marriage, a kind of process began wherein a woman became a man's property. Now, even if you see in the Indian context, it's the parigrahan sanskar, which means the girl is given to the groom. So and even in other communities, we have heard of such practices. So when these kind of practices take place, they go on missing on one very important aspect of marriage, which when came into being kind of further complicated, so to say, the situation. Love. So there is one study by Marilyn Yalom, a Stanford historian and author of a book called A History of the Wife, and she credits the concept of romantic love with giving women greater leverage in what has been a largely pragmatic kind of a transaction. She said that wives no longer existed solely to serve men. The whole kind of idea of the romantic prince and all that. And she said that when colonists first came to America, they sort of polygamy was kind of practiced at that point of time, accepted very much, but the husband dominance was officially recognized under a legal doctrine called coverture. So she goes on to talk a lot about the procedure of marriage and how emotions kind of get mixed and what is the woman's position there. But primarily, I take up her name here and bring into her discussion, because most time when we talk about intercaste marriages, we forget the kind of impulse love as an emotion creates when we talk about the institution of marriage, and of course the element of choice, because whenever we talk about intercaste marriages, uh, in at least 99% of them are because these are two individuals who kind of love each other. So there is also in fact while I was talking while I was researching for this talk, I also came across a very wonderful book. It's called The Colors of Love by John Lee, a 1973 book. which talks about 6 styles of love. So, even in that, you come across something which is a kind of an impulsive love and something kind of a pragmatic love, love at first sight, all those things. So, maybe that dimension, people do not value much in terms of how marriage as an institution functions in the context of India. Apart from that, one very important thing that I think we also can discuss in the Indian context is that while the rest of the world, marriage is that union of two people, in the context of India, it is a kind of a social institution which is determined based on caste system, dowry payments, age, siblings. Uh, um, I mean, a lot of family systems, very layered kind of family systems, get involved in either side of which the couple belongs. So, in that sense, it is not a kind of a union or unison of two people, but of two families. There are two particularly researchers that I will mention here. One is that I came across Rajiv Lochandhar's article. It's called Inter-Caste Marriage, a study from Indian context. It was published in 2013. He goes on to discuss the issues and challenges faced when defying the traditional culture of arranged marriage to enter into an intercaste marriage. And he takes up like 15 case studies from Indian rural context and goes on to have a very in-depth interview. It's a very beautifully written, articulated article, very logical and very, very comprehensive. And it concludes that even today, when we talk about intercaste marriages being prevalent, they are very much prevalent in rural India, especially also in the urban setup. But urban setup has become slightly more inclusive as as they come to know of the various policies and other things. They are more accepting of the fact and also more inclusive. But in rural India, somebody who does an intercaste marriage, the couple is kind of the couple has to face dire consequences.
Right.
Another study that I came across was from Princeton. It's again, for 149 intercaste marriages they studied in Bombay, where again, and maybe some about the caste dynamics here. They took into account the caste dynamics, where scheduled caste exhibited a high tendency for intercaste marriages than other castes. So this caste stratification of the Indian society, which has its origin in Chaturvarna system, where we know that Indian Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. D.N. Majumdar has written a lot about how the caste system took its birth after the arrival of Aryans in around 1500 BC. But like Professor Nasmeem said, when we talk about Indian census, especially of the 2011, 5.8% of the marriages in India are intercaste marriages. So they were publicly also encouraged and supported, though they haven't made it to the agendas. I don't know why the political parties, when they announced their election campaign, but yes, it was Supreme Court came up with the decision on this, and they went on to talk about very openly encouraging intercaste marriages in the context of India, because it is primarily about two individuals, adult individuals, deciding their course of life. In fact, a study conducted by ISI Kolkata in 2017 talks about intercaste marriages being more frequent in rural areas. So in 2013, when we talk about her study, indicate that probably there is less, marriages, intercaste marriages happening in rural India, whereas this 2017 study indicates that there are more of urban, the rural intercaste marriages than urban marriages, which statistically, I think 5.2 and 4.9 is the dimension. So when we talk about these intercaste marriages in the context of India, they get very so to say, a very nuanced understanding when we talk about social dynamics. I was listening to I think Sadhguru was talking about why marriage, why caste-based marriage actually started happening in the context of India. And he went on to say that it was basically to transfer knowledge. And initially, like, he gave a very good example of goldsmith and blacksmith. So if a goldsmith daughter has seen, I mean, while she's growing up, she's seen all the tools and techniques of how a goldsmith works. So maybe when she goes there in another family, maybe, she can be helped. So it's a kind of transfer of knowledge. Whereas if she gets married to a blacksmith's family, maybe, she'll be helpless. So he said that at that point of time, when this institution, the caste as an institution, was established to kind of transfer knowledge, it was absolutely all right. But now, in the contemporary society, when there are institutions that transfer knowledge, probably that is not something that we have to look for. So caste dynamics have to change in terms of how marriage should be refashioned in times today. It's something that also he said. And of course, we have B.R. Ambedkar in Annihilation of Caste, when one of the most read books that talks about nullifying the element of caste, not only in the context of marriage, but everywhere. And especially if we see the ways in which it has also propagated violence, especially in certain sections of Indian society, just because, somebody marries a different caste, honor killing, and I don't know. I mean, so such patriarchally rooted discourse where the entire family's honor is lying on a girl, and if she marries somebody else, then it kind of violates that. It's a problematic discourse, and that has to be, discussed, and people should be sensitized. And I think, in my opinion, at the core of everything lies economy. So maybe the economic dimension that people explore via within caste marriages is also something that kind of is an important discussion when we talk about intercaste marriages. So more or less, those are my thoughts on intercaste marriages in historical perspective.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was a really persuasive talk, deeply informative, and extremely interesting. Thank you so much. Uh, Professor Harleen, do you resonate with what Professor Nasmeem and Professor Tripathi has said?
Absolutely, yes. And thank you so much for organizing this and for having me here. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to people about this topic. And uh, both Professor Akhtar and Professor Tripathi have, really laid out also a kind of historical, contemporary, um, not only background to the question of intercaste marriage, but they've also raised some questions. So, Deyasini, I was going to follow the format that you had asked for, which was to talk for a few minutes about what I
Absolutely.
thought about intercaste marriage and then respond to
Absolutely.
questions. So it's, in some ways, it's a hard act to follow. Both the speakers before me have done such a great job of really laying out the groundwork of the things that are important in thinking about intercaste marriage. So I thought I would take a step back and perhaps raise a few of the larger questions that come to mind, um, and the ways in which intercaste marriage really needs to be refracted. Um, One, as Professor Tripathi put it, the economy is at the heart of things. And so I want to go back a little bit to talking about. Um, she spoke a little. She spoke about the ways in which uh, caste, a marriage, the idea of love allows you a certain kind of access. How it has changed the notion and institution of marriage. So there are a few points here that I'd like to highlight and engage with, if that's possible. One of them, of course, is that one thing that is very important from both the speakers before and that I would like to really underline here is that marriage is a construct, right? What we are all talking about here is the ways in which intercaste, caste itself, which is a construct, then intersects with marriage, which is a construct, right? The question, of course, is that in many of our lives and in the general understanding, mainstream understanding of these concepts, we have a sense of a naturalized way of being in terms of identity. We're simply born this, we are that, right? I am this, I am Punjabi, you're Bengali, I'm this, I'm a Marathi, I'm Kashmiri. But in many ways, all of these are constructs. These are things that are given to us. None of us are born with any of these as ingrained into our DNA, right? Of course, some people will argue otherwise. Similarly, marriage is a construct, right? Marriage is something that has evolved. To think about marriage as something that is a priori, that has always existed, I think is a huge gap in our understanding to thinking about marriage or caste, right? And as pointed out, marriage has existed in many different forms and it has evolved. And I think that's the key question. The ways in which social constructs, religious constructs of marriage and caste evolve, that there is movement, there is change, there is a dynamic quality to each of these things that we think of as social constructs. The second thing I wanted to point out is the ways in which these social constructs, and both the speakers before me have referred to this a bit, but maybe not said it in the same way that I'm going to say it, which is that both these constructs allow us to access the state in particular ways, right? Which is that if you are married, it gives you a certain legitimacy in accessing the state. If your partner dies, can you access property or not? That depends on whether you were married or not. If you have children, are they considered legitimate? Can they have access to your property or not? So, as Professor Tripathi had pointed out, both economy, but economy also as it is at the heart of the state, right? Marriage allows us to access the state in ways in which if you're not falling under the legal definitions of marriage, you cannot. And that is part of the reason also why many LGBTQ movements around the world have asked for recognition for gay marriage, for gay union, so that there is a way in which same-sex partners can also access the state. Okay? In thinking about knowledge, Professor Tripathi pointed out the access of knowledge and the transfer of knowledge. I want to complicate that again, in very thankful ways to her, complicated also to thinking about the guarding of knowledge, right? Power is at the heart of knowledge production. Who gets to have control over certain kind of knowledge, right? I mean, it is no accident that the uppermost echelon of Hindu caste system, right, are people, Brahmins, who can actually have access and control over knowledge, and very control over knowledge production, which then allows for a particular kind of hegemony and control over the ways in which society functions. So it isn't just the production of knowledge or the use of knowledge, I would like to say, but also the power dynamic that is embedded in knowledge, which is the control of knowledge. It is no accident then when we think about post-colonial India or to think about contemporary India, the ways in which reservations in educational institutions have been huge issues over the years, right? Starting from the Mandal Commission in the 80s to now, the idea of who can or cannot have access to knowledge, what that does in terms of knowledge production is a huge question. It's not just knowledge as it is based in skills, in labor, in whether you're a farmer or whether you're an artisan or a carpenter, but also knowledge as it is in the kind of knowledge production that actually controls society. And the last thing I want to say before we open up to a general question and answer, because in many ways, again, I feel like both the speakers before me have laid out the groundwork, and I don't want to simply be repeating what they've said, but I want to raise questions, in accordance with what they've said, is really caste and purity as it stands at the heart of nation building, right? Right from the moment of Professor Akhtar had pointed out the many different kinds of laws that were promulgated for marriage and intercaste unions. But right from the time of partition, right, there were already laws on, that were right at the heart, at the beginning of the nation. We had this question of intercaste and interreligious marriages. Many, of course, which were, a case of abduction and conversion and all of these things, but many that were volition and voluntary, that many that were done out of choice.
Hmm.
And the laws in trying to protect women who they thought had been forcibly abducted then made all intercaste and interreligious marriages illegal from March 47 onward. And what that did was take away the choice for those who had actually voluntarily entered into these unions. So I think the history of partition cannot be ignored when thinking about contemporary India and thinking about intercaste marriages. Because I think that kind of host, that specter of partition continues to come up at many different points in time. And the intercaste marriages, when that kind of ghostly presence of partition is there, intercaste, interreligious marriages are almost always, refracted or seen or interpreted as a kind of attack, as a kind of incursion into a closed group, right? And I think that that is something we have to grapple with. The ways in which the early history of the nation, the early history of partition, has actually set up a particular lens for us through which we often view intercaste marriages. And I think that we cannot talk about contemporary India without talking about that moment of beginning for the nation that is India. Because I want to draw a distinction here. And the distinction is between the land that is India, or the culture that is India, and the nation that is India. The land and culture that is India is ancient. However, the nation is a modern construct. And in a modern construct, it has at its heart notions of nation building, who belongs and who doesn't belong, notions of citizenship, property, inheritance, political representation, reservation. All of these, which are legal, legislative categories, but are really at the heart of a new nation and a new nation building. So I would really like to be able to talk with my colleagues and with my esteemed panelists today also about the ways in which these two categories of the ancient and the modern intersect when talking about intercaste marriages. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
ma'am.
ma'am.
It was
It
a
was
wonderful
wonderful.
10 minutes. Very enlightening indeed. Uh, Professor Tripathi, would you like to answer? Would you like to
Oh,
begin?
yes. When we talk about, first of all, Professor Harleen, that was wonderful. I mean, I think you brought in the construct of nation and, of course, the event of partition. So, in a very legit way, you got it into the discussion. So, I have 2 points to perhaps just add to what Professor Harleen said right now about, when partition happened. More than that, I think when our nation as a construct got established and the constitution got made, it took more than 20 years. I think it was for the first time in 1975 with Samita Sen's towards inequality report. When that came, in fact, that for the first time created the buzz around how women were kind of sort of wiped off from the Constitution of India. So uh, from there, if you see how these intercaste marriages, especially I'll talk about Special Marriage Act that got placed in the Constitution, and I was reading about the experiences of a lot of people who had interfaith marriages, interreligious marriages. So they said that without changing the religion or without changing the name, etc. When they went ahead for Special Marriage Act provision, it outside the office where they outside the court, their photos were hung for like 30 days, like a criminal. So it made the entire process of marriage, which is supposedly, a kind of a beautiful thing for people who get into relationships like marriage, uh, a very painful kind of an experience, a very crime-like experience. So also there was this pamphlet that was pasted along with the photo, which read, and I'll read it out to you. It said, Notice, objection, if any, to the solemnization of the marriage shall be preferred by the objector in writing to the marriage officer within 30 days from the date of its publication. Now, this in itself was the infringement of something that was very personal, and apart, and in which uh, the guardians of the state, like when we construct a nation, the idea of nationalism, the idea of nationhood also uh, gets into being, and how this idea further is kind of guarded by these people who are self-declared nationalists and protectors of their own culture and tradition. So on the name of this guardianship that they take, like what you're saying, that they, the whole idea is centered around who will control. So control becomes the key word. I mean, so one particular caste, one particular community, they start deciding that, okay, fine, I will take control of, protecting the honor of the family, which is there in the institution of marriage. So, an institution of marriage becomes a very legit kind of a place for them to sort of infuse the element of their tradition, which is maintaining the sanctity of the caste, maintaining the sanctity of the community. Whereas several researchers in the contemporary times have gone on to talk about how intercaste marriages are, in fact, genetically beneficial. So, uh, 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 I mean, contradicting, and there is where the paradox lies, and that is not the paradox that has appeared now, but the difference between culture and nature and science and philosophy and all those, they have existed for longest period of time. So yes, bringing in the dimension of partition is very important, because it brings in the whole dynamics of how that event, also followed by some other events as well, seeped in the element of communal feeling very strategically and very deeply into the Indian roots. So, though we have kind of went on to talk about democracy and secularism and all those things, but within the layers of this democracy and secularism and all of that, probably there is an undercurrent of communalism which was there from not just the time of partition, before that and after that. So there are several traditions and interventions that can be talked about at that point of time.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. Professor Nasmeem, would you like to say something with regards to the questions Professor Harleen has asked,
Uh,
has raised?
yes, I think I first of all wish to congratulate Professor Harleen and Professor Priyanka for actually taking it through and bringing in a lot of weight to this entire idea, which we often just associate with maybe the union of two persons. So I think there's some disturbance. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Yeah.
hear you. You're
Yeah.
audible.
So yes, so I would definitely go with Professor Harleen in talking about the partition, because I think prior to that, I mean, there was one India, and I mean, the common enemy was perhaps to just, I mean, the British. So till then, perhaps these ideas related to a separate communal, group or a separate community, so to say, was perhaps somewhere not. I mean, it was there, but then it was not brought to the fore that way. But the partition actually brought in those very very I would say latent discriminations that were there, and somewhere people began to realize, yes, we are different. So the partition,
Absolutely.
in a way, I would call to be a watershed moment, definitely. And yes, I mean, along with that, if I may again go back to what Professor Harleen was trying to talk about, the ancient and the contemporaneous, the kind of, where we try to look into when we talk
Mhm.
about intercaste marriages. Now, I
Mhm.
think one very important point out here when we talk about the nation being a construct, is actually the point where we can actually relate, or rather bring in this entire idea of two people getting together across the caste, right? Because, on the one hand, okay, so herein actually comes in the conflict that I was talking about. While we all appreciate that, it is, I mean, we have Dr. Ambedkar talking in Annihilation of Caste that if at all we need to break through all the barriers of caste, it is primarily through intermarriage. We all appreciate that. But at the same time, you have on the one hand the idea of the traditional values, etc., which we want to cling on to. At the same time, you also have that urge to be part of this new India, which we call it. So, somewhere there is a conflict, and in between, whatever we talk about in terms of love. So I feel, given all that, I mean, given the kind of conflict that one goes through, trying to seek for a merger between the ancient and or rather, somewhat non-contemporaneous and the contemporaneous, is a point where maybe we lose that significance of love in a marriage, in a union, right? So there are other factors coming in out there, for example. So just because you need to assert yourself as citizens of one particular part of the country or one particular part of the region, so somewhere, I have a feeling that today when we talk about intercaste marriages, it is not simply the marriage which is born, or rather it cannot be looked at as a point of consummation of love. Rather, there are different other issues which perhaps two partners think about when they actually try to, or rather think in settling down in marriage. And that is where, these ideas of nation being a construct is actually a very dominant idea. So especially when you look for your partners and when you think in terms of settling down, because again, as I would like to say, even today when we think in terms of marriage, I think it's we are very much far from that idea that marriage can be a very, very liberal institution. The moment you are in a marital relationship, it's just for, till for your life. So when you look at it from that point of view, I mean, there is this conflict. The conflict comes in very apparent in an effort to somewhere try to strike a balance between the traditional values that you have acquired and the very liberal mindset that we are trying to head on to. So yeah, I think, Professor Harleen and Professor Priyanka have actually brought in some very thought provoking ideas, and at this point maybe we can take on to some other areas as well.
Thank you, Professor Nasmeem. That was indeed very thought provoking. So, we have just had a discussion on how constructs of caste in marriage evolved. So, yes, intercaste marriage is a very pertinent and a complex social issue in the Indian context, deeply rooted in economic and political necessities. And I believe, despite the emancipatory move of governmental incentives and social movements, the problem of intercaste marriage has been little addressed in educated masses. So, is it therefore a mandatory education pertinent to the issue, or thinking beyond the humanizing sections of the textbooks, do you think would constitute a watershed in annihilating the regressive cultural orthodoxy of the caste hierarchy that reinforces untouchability and discrimination? And do you also think incentivization or incentivizing have a genuine impact on intrinsic motivation? Professor Tripathi, would you please begin?
So see, the government has come up with these schemes, but like I said in the very beginning, they decide the number. So the government has also decided for like 500, I think is the number. I think I was reading a report somewhere. I'm not very sure about it. So in a population of like so much,
Hmm.
500 intercaste marriages is sanctioned. So imagine even there is the element of the state control comes into being even there. So why is that practice? So while you give liberty, it's a controlled liberty that you give. So a kind of a check and balance situation. So in my opinion, if you ask me, I don't think it is going to take away the caste orthodoxy, because there is a kind of a motive behind that. Primarily when we talk about why do people want to get married, it is a kind of a psychological contract, if I may say so. But when you talk about institution of marriage, it becomes a social contract. And why legality is important is also something that we have to ponder over. Why when you are so, I mean, when it is just the union of two people, why do you want legality to come into being? Why do you want marriage as an institution to endorse your love? It is because there are so many other things that are part of marriage, like right to property, like right to divorce, custody of the child, so many things that come into being. Otherwise, who will guard all these other aspects of what marriage comes with? Marriage indeed comes with the union of two people, but two people also come along with their own psychological, emotional, economical, social, cultural baggage. So, how does that gets regulated? Is what probably marriage as an institution does, and it obviously gets support from state and law and all those. So I don't think caste hierarchy can go just like that, if it is sanctioned kind of a leverage is given to these practices. I think it should just be probably open, and that is when motiveless actions, perhaps just maybe supported by law. I think there was one judgment that I read of Supreme Court where they did not talk about some kind of incentive being given to people who marry in their lower caste or SC/ST. I think that is the whole idea. So they did not talk about that, but it said that it will provide the entire support in terms of police machinery, and support in terms of safety, support in terms of some kind of the most important at that point of time is perhaps saving life. So maybe that kind of safety measures, Supreme Court said that they should be given. If two people who are from different castes, they come and report to the police station about their safety issues because they are getting married, I think there was this mandate that said that they should be given all protection from the state. So something like that. So I mean, not control, but yes, limitless probably.
Thank you, Professor Tripathi, for that answer. Uh, Moving on to Professor Nasmeem, what do you have to say in this regard?
Yes, I think you brought in a very pertinent point, Deyasini. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah,
you are on.
yeah. So
Yeah.
the idea of educating now, the question is, whom do you educate? I mean, the figure that we gave. I mean, I think Professor Priyanka also referred to it. That it's barely about 5 to 5.8, 5 to 6% of marriages that have been intercaste, and this is 2011 census, when we are supposed to be thinking that okay, there is I mean, the literacy rates and all these other parameters are ever on the rise. So but then whose education are we talking about, right? So we are very much emphatic about the fact that we need to put in our children to the best of modern education facilities that are available, that we can have access to. But when it comes to choosing one's mate, there is something that holds us back. So where do you and then the fact that you are being held back, it's not just because of your own personal preferences or the familial pressures. It is, as Professor Tripathi said, it's not just marriage between two people or union between two people. There is a whole lot of a baggage coming in, the question of, property rights, the question of the right to divorce, the question of, acquiring land, and everything coming in out there. So when you think in those terms, we are actually at a loss as to whom do you educate over here. And I suppose a very pertinent question out here would be, uh, uh, you know the kind of sensitization that we talk about in terms of empowerment of women. And when we talk about empowerment of women, I do not just mean to talk about, the ones that we see. I mean, we have to start from the roots, if that is at all possible. And I know I'm referring to a very, very idealistic kind of a situation, but I suppose the very fact that we have more and more people, coming in for an intercaste marriage, because undoubtedly intercaste marriages would go a long way in bringing in a stable caste ridden society. So when we talk in terms of those ideas, maybe the very we need to start with, thinking in terms of, a better facilities for women in terms of education, in terms of workplace, in terms of, all different kinds of places. Because ultimately, it's a matter of, respecting the dignity of an individual to choose his or her own partner. And that will, I mean, because see, no matter how much we talk about the different legal provisions that are there, no matter how much we talk about the benefits of an intercaste marriage or an interfaith marriage, it has to actually come from within. The change has to come from the mindset. And I
Right.
suppose here I think women have a major role to play, because all these different violences that happen as a result of intercaste marriage is primarily to bring in a woman's right under control, or rather it's primarily to tame a woman's situation, or a woman's predicament. So that is where I think we need to start. And I know I'm sounding completely idealistic when I talk about, you know bringing in a kind of, revolutionary change in the mindset of people, attitudes towards women, because I know, I mean, the kind of situation we are all in. But if at all this has to happen, I think somewhere we need to be more liberal, in terms of giving space to our girls and women to make their own individual choices. Because ultimately, when it comes to choosing their partners, I think parents then become very jittery at the fact that so and
Absolutely.
so is going to marry below or above
True.
one's caste, or maybe a
True.
different faith. So I think if we at all need to educate, we need to educate people, we need to sensitize from that point. And it is not just families, I think it's the different other institutions, like the police, the legal personnel. Because most often we are not we try to interpret the law according to our own conveniences. For example, I mean, when you talk about the Special Marriage Act, which permits intercaste marriage, I mean, what bothers most of us, or other people, are not even aware of that, wherein because that law actually also permits interfaith marriage. And out there we see that, there is this clause where you need to actually have a set of people who will be, kind of giving a kind of a sanction to their relationship. Only then the law becomes so
True.
there is a clause in Special Marriages Act out there. So these are, those those kind of sensitizations are definitely required. But again, I feel that it is still a very sensitive issue, even in our present day so called liberal society. But then yes, we need to, start off somewhere. That is where what I would like to put in at this point.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Nasmeem. That was a really wonderful answer. Professor Harleen, would you please offer us your insights in this regard?
Um, I really feel like the third wheel because I feel like Nasmeem and Priyanka, I hope you don't mind me using your first names for my colleagues,
Most
have
welcome.
already
It's a pleasure.
have already raised such important issues and such, such historical and politically important questions, and so um, what I hope to do is, because I'm in complete agreement, so I cannot disagree. All I can do is, I think, add, excuse me, add something to this. And I think one of the things that I'd like to two thoughts that I would like to go on is really the question of the woman, as Professor Akhtar put it. That it is really hinging on the idea of choice and agency for women, and control over their bodies. And I think that is an issue right from starting from, well, as far back as we can go. But I think one of the important questions here is to really think about the ways in which, why that is important, right? Why is it that women become this kind of pivotal figure in history, in culture, in religion, in contemporary India? Because as we've seen it, on the books, I mean, India should be the safest country for women, right? Our laws are some of the best laws in the world. On the books, we should be the most secular place in the world. Our laws, our constitution is solid, right? In the books, we should be one of the best places in the world to love. We have every freedom enshrined within the constitution and our legal structure, right? So on the books, we are golden. It's it's on the street that we're not, right? It's in real life that all of these things, break apart. And I think that's what I want to get at. And I think the reason that that happens is because the figure of the woman, I mean, and I want to go all the way back to, even the mid 19th century to, 1857 and the first rebellion and the first war of independence against the British, because, we have figures like, the Rani of Jhansi or others in history whom we, revere and talk about as these warrior women, goddesses across the Hindu pantheon that are strong goddesses, strong figures. Right? But we also have, alongside it, an entire trajectory of woman as in need of protection. And I want to really trace that to a kind of emergence of Mother India, right? India there is actually, somebody is going to take issue with me for sure, but there is no actual goddess, Mother India, within the Hindu pantheon. The earth is a goddess, right? Mother Earth is a goddess, but there is no Mother India as such. And Mother India as a goddess figure really begins to emerge with the growing nationalist movement against the British. It emerges also very much with the Bhadralok movement in Bengal, in the ideas of thinking about the India and culture and the nation as someone in need of rescue. And that has a lot to do with masculinity and the emergence of Bengali masculinity as well. So I think that, the figure of this, of the mother figure as a nation, the mother as culture, the mother as religion, this is something that is very, as at the heart of thinking about intercaste marriages. And I think this is something we have to grapple with too, because we have many religions within India that do not have goddesses, right? And this is a tension that was there, through the nationalist movement as well. That there was, a way in which thinking about the country as a goddess, thinking about the nation in particularly religious Hindu-oriented ways, was leaving out so many people who did not fall within those categories. So I think we have to really grapple with why woman at the center of intercaste marriages is important, because woman is also at the center of the national story, right? But almost always as a figure of representation, not as a figure of rights. That's my key question, right? We have woman we can represent the nation as a mother goddess. We can represent culture as woman, religion as woman, goddess as woman. But the idea of woman as a figure with rights, and by rights, I don't just mean the right to get a good degree, the right to a good education, the right to this. I mean the right to mess up. Why should women not have the right to be incorrect, to do the wrong thing, to mess up, to choose a marriage partner and then decide, no, this is not working out, I want to choose another partner, right? I mean, this is the key question. Intercaste marriages, the whole question of intercaste marriages is really about solidifying solidifying, as both Nasmeem and Priyanka put it, solidifying a particular control over the body that is woman. And but whenever we talk about the body that is woman in terms of rights, if we're only talking about it as rights in this kind of morally superior structured way, to be educated, to have a job, to have this, I want to talk about rights to be a normal human being. A normal human being messes up. They make mistakes. They do the wrong thing. And I think that kind of entire spectrum of personhood is missing from women's lives.
True that.
And so that to me is the crux of this, as Nasneem put it, the choice to make your choices, be they right, be they wrong. And I think that is key here, because in many ways intercaste marriages, as I put earlier, have evolved. They've evolved with economic means, depending on whether there were enough women in the society or not. Various people, various communities decided to marry outside of caste because there were not enough women within their caste. So all of these things have evolved, and I think we're at a particular moment at which I have such respect for my colleagues who are working on these topics, in a situation right now that can be very harsh and very unforgiving about speaking about these topics. So, I think we need to call a spade, and talk about this not just in terms of religion and what is right and what is good, but this is control of people's bodies, and especially women's bodies. Sorry, I got very, very passionate on that.
Thank you, Professor Harleen, for offering such an enlightening perspective. Thank you once again. Moving on to my second question, a part of which I have talked about in the initial part of my conversation. Genetic research shows that the prevalence of exogamous unions dates back to thousands of years and is known to exist in the form of anuloma or pratiloma marriages. The Manusmriti, the text on which caste classifications were put in place, provides an interesting insight into the way ancient society in India understood marriage. The Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita, that propound equality and betterment of all, endorse the idea of intercaste marriage. Until recently, hypergamy was prevalent in Bengal among certain sections of Brahmins. In Kerala, the younger sons of number three Brahmins were allowed to marry the Nayar women, and it is said to have existed among the Rajput clans and the Rathors of Marwar, despite history being the torch-bearer. What does it mean to be a child of an intercaste union in postmodern India? Now, I would be a little cautious here since I have used the term hypergamy and the phrase history as the torchbearer, while the associative function of a hypergamous milieu restores its pronounced patrilineal line and is known to be associated with the subservient status of women. But my purpose of employing both the term and the phrase and the purpose of our session today is rather to look at caste through uh, a newer lens of sensitivity and understanding. Professor Nasmeem, would you please begin?
Yeah, Deyasini, I would like.
You were on
Yeah,
mute.
Harleen has. Yeah, yeah. Can you hear me now? Can
Yes,
you
I
hear
can
me
hear
now,
you.
Deyasini? Yeah, yeah. I
I
would
can hear
love
you.
to comment. then yeah, I understand Professor Harleen has to leave. So I would request her to first of all give her comments, and then maybe I will come in.
Okay, okay, okay.
Yeah,
So,
to
Professor
start off.
Harleen,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Professor Harleen, would you please begin?
I thank you so much, Nasmeem. That's very kind of you. I'm sorry, folks. For me, it's morning, so my meetings are just beginning. So I have a meeting in 15 minutes that I have to get at. So I have to leave it at 5. But in a way, Deyasini, I spoke a little bit to your question in the things that I was saying early on, which is that we have found throughout
Mhm,
history that there have been economic, social, and conditions of war and others that have been created that have always given religious, caste, ethnic questions a certain flexibility, right?
mhm,
So, what we think is sacrosanct, for instance, we're talking about even the question of polygamy. We have noted that in because of the loss of women over the years and the skewed sex ratio, many areas, within India have gone back to a certain kind of arrangement which allowed for not polygamy but polyandry, where one woman can be married to multiple men because to
mhm,
make up for the loss of women. So, I just in short, so that I want to hear what my other panelists have to say as well, because I think that this is really a question that brings to the fore this notion of what is natural, what is written, what is ancient, because all of the examples that you have given us and everything that you're talking about shows us the ways in which these constructs are moderated depending on who's interpreting them, depending on who's the authority on them, and also the ways in which they evolve depending on the conditions around you,
mhm,
right? People get married to people, in because of certain environmental conditions and others, and that is key to understanding this. I don't think that we should look at any of these examples as some kind of revolutionary moment or think that, okay, this is inspirational, oh look, this can happen, but rather to look at these examples as evidence of things that are constructed. These examples show us that there is no such thing as natural when it comes to marriage or caste, right? No such thing as biological when it comes to marriage or caste, but rather that all of these things are constructs.
okay. Thank you so much, Professor Harleen. So moving on to, so will you stay with us and hear what your
I will stay for another 5 minutes, then I
okay,
have to go.
okay. So moving
Sorry
on
about
to,
that.
no, it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. So moving on to Professor Tripathi, could you please offer us your perspectives on that?
I have a very, very short remark to make. I think the whole idea of two people coming together began with the element of choice. If we talk about Gandhar Viva and all those things, I think we should just go back to that. I think that will sort out all the issues. And that is what probably, when you say being a child of an intercaste union in postmodern India, I think that is what it is all about. So I think my closing remarks would be that.
I'm the product of an intercaste marriage, interreligious
Okay,
marriage, and
okay,
given the laws and given the kind of
great to know.
today, I would be an illegitimate child, happily so. But I think that it's interesting also to see that we are not really moving on a linear progression in terms of
Correct.
history and in terms of progress and liberalism, right? That things we tend to have, especially when we are young. I mean, I'm not anymore, but when we are young, we tend to have this idea of, movement in time means progress.
Yeah.
And I'd like to point out that that's not necessarily the case. Things might have been more progressive in the 70s when my parents got married to now. And that we need to really, if there's anything to look towards the ancients, it is to look at the ways in which, in fact, things were far more progressive in many ways then.
Yes, I mean, an entire discussion can take place over Kama Sutra.
Yes.
Okay. So moving on to Professor Nasmeem, ma'am, if you
Yeah,
would.
I would also keep it absolutely short. I mean, going with Harleen, the very fact that yes, we need not look at all these different events like intercaste marriages as something very groundbreaking or path breaking. It's simply the fact that two people have decided to be together. And I think a child born out of a union of two people who are from different castes would actually go with that kind of a takeaway, that it is ultimately not a caste of not belonging to a particular caste or not belonging to a particular caste. Rather, it is the kind of respect that you have towards each other. And it's basically a matter of compatibility. And I suppose for a child born out of that particular relationship would definitely grow with a lot of a liberal attitude, so to say. And I think the child would absolutely be with no conflict, like the way we are going across now. I mean, whether to be or not to be. I mean, I think a child born out of a relationship between two people from two different castes would never ever come across that conflict. And I very rightly, as Priyanka and Harleen both have put it, I mean, it is, I mean, why do we always look at the the modern times or the present times as very liberating or very open minded, so to say? I mean, just as it was put, I mean, we actually are making things complicated by calling things postmodern. I mean, I think we were very much postmodern even back in the 70s or the 60s, when we didn't even think of these things to be something so very great. For example, we never heard of an honor killing instance. Maybe there was not so much of social media and all that, but I'm sure, I mean, these are certain instances which have come to the fore in the present times. So having said that, I mean, my closing remark would be that a child born out of a relationship from between two people from two different castes would definitely understand that it's all about compatibility and respect for each other, rather than the different other baggages that come with caste and creed and religion and all of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Nasmeem, for that very crisp and wonderful answer. Yes, we certainly need to look at these things with informed understanding and sensitivity. My heartfelt thanks to all of you for your valuable time and for sharing your wisdom for project. Thank you so much. Yes, we are calling for submissions of stories, essays, and poems as part of the project. To know more, please visit www.tellmeastory.biz. Stay safe, everybody, and bye bye.
Thank you so much, Professor Harleen and Professor Nasmeen and Deyasini. It was
Thank you
wonderful
very much.
to discuss
Yes,
very passionately. You
I
got
think
carried away, and we loved
absolutely.
that.
Thank
Absolutely.
you
This
so
seems to
much.
be
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you
so
so much.
It was a
yeah.
pleasure
Thank you
having
very
all
much.
of you amongst us today. Thank you.
pleasure
Thank
to
you.
meet
Thank
you
Thank
you
you.
all.
very
I hope the conversations continue. Bye bye.
Thank you so
right.
much.
We need
Bye.